Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we dive into Edgar Allan Poe's chilling masterpiece, The Premature Burial. What you're about to hear is a suspenseful, reimagined narration in English, crafted to bring fresh life to Poe's haunting vision and to keep you gripped until the very last word.
There are certain subjects so overwhelming, so drenched in horror, that ordinary fiction dares not touch them. To approach such themes without the weight of truth is to risk revulsion rather than fascination. Yet history itself has given us calamities that stir a dreadful fascination. Lisbon swallowed by earthquake, London ravaged by plague, the massacre of St. Bartholomew, or the suffocation of prisoners in Calcutta's Black Hole. These terrors grip us not because they are imagined, but because they are real. Were they inventions, we would recoil in disgust. But true misery is not measured by vast disasters alone. The deepest agony belongs not to the masses, but to the solitary soul. It is the individual who endures the ultimate torment, and for that we may thank a merciful God, that suffering is not endlessly multiplied. And among all conceivable torments, none is more dreadful than being buried alive. This fate, more than once recorded in grim reality, stands as the most terrifying boundary between life and death. For who can say where life ends and death begins? The line is blurred, shadowy, uncertain. There are illnesses in which every sign of vitality vanishes. Breath ceases, pulse halts, the body lies motionless. Yet these are but pauses, temporary suspensions in the mysterious machinery of existence. Then, without warning, some hidden spark reignites the wheels of life. The silver cord is not severed, the golden bowl not shattered. But in that eerie silence, during that dreadful pause, where does the soul wander? Beyond the simple logic that suspended animation must sometimes lead to premature burial, there exists undeniable testimony, accounts from medicine and ordinary life that prove such horrors have truly occurred. Hundreds of cases could be cited, but one stands out with unforgettable terror. Not long ago, in Baltimore, the city was shaken by a tragedy that spread fear like wildfire. The wife of a respected lawyer, a man of prominence, and a member of Congress, was struck by a sudden, baffling illness. Physicians exhausted their skill, but she slipped into what all believed was death. Her face hollowed, her lips turned marble pale, her eyes dulled to lifeless glass. No warmth, no pulse. Every sign confirmed the grave had claimed her. For 3 days her body lay unburied, stiffening into stone. Fearing decay, the family hastened the funeral. She was sealed within the family vault, undisturbed for 3 long years. Then, when the tomb was opened to receive another coffin, the husband himself swung wide the iron door. What met him was a vision so ghastly it shattered his soul. A white-shrouded figure collapsed into his arms, the skeletal remains of his wife still wrapped in her burial cloth. The investigation revealed the dreadful truth. She had revived within 2 days of entombment. In her desperate struggle, she broke free from her coffin as it crashed to the floor. A lamp left burning in the vault was found drained of oil. On the steps lay a splintered fragment of wood, evidence of her frantic attempts to pound against the iron door, begging for rescue. But terror overcame her. She collapsed, her shroud snagged on the jagged ironwork, leaving her to perish upright, rotting where she fell. In 1810, France witnessed a tale so extraordinary that it proved truth can eclipse fiction. The central figure was Mademoiselle Victorine Lafourcade, a young woman of noble birth, immense wealth, and striking beauty. Among her admirers was Julien Bossuet, a struggling Parisian writer whose charm and intellect had won her heart. Yet pride and family honor prevailed. Victorine rejected him and married Monsieur Renelle, a banker and diplomat of reputation. Marriage, however, brought her only misery. Neglect turned to cruelty, and after years of suffering, she fell into an illness that mimicked death with terrifying perfection. Her body was laid to rest in a simple grave in her native village. But Bossuet, consumed by grief and undying devotion, traveled from Paris with a desperate purpose. At midnight, he unearthed her coffin, intending only to claim a lock of her hair. As he reached for it, the impossible happened. The eyes of the beloved opened. Victorine had not died at all. She had been buried alive. Seizing her in frantic arms, Bossuet carried her to his lodgings. With feverish determination, he applied restoratives, coaxing life back into her fragile frame. Slowly, miraculously, she revived. Recognition dawned. Love rekindled, and her heart, once hardened by pride, yielded at last to the man who had saved her from the grave. She never returned to her husband. Concealing her resurrection, she fled with Bossuet across the ocean to America. For 20 years they lived in obscurity, until time emboldened them to return to France. They believed her altered appearance would shield her from recognition. But fate was cruel. Renelle saw her, claimed her, and dragged the matter before the courts. The tribunal, however, ruled in her favor. The extraordinary circumstances and the long passage of years had dissolved the husband's authority, both morally and legally. Victorine remained free, bound only to the man who had rescued her from the grave. The Chirurgical Journal of Leipzig once recorded an event so harrowing that it seemed torn from the darkest corners of nightmare. An artillery officer, towering in stature, strong and vigorous, was thrown violently from a wild, unmanageable horse. His skull fractured, he fell unconscious. Surgeons acted swiftly. Trepanning was performed, bloodletting applied, every remedy attempted. Yet his condition worsened, sinking into a deep stupor, until all believed death had claimed him. The summer heat pressed heavily, and with indecent haste he was buried in a public cemetery. His funeral took place on Thursday. By Sunday the grounds were crowded with visitors when a peasant, pale with terror, declared he had felt the earth tremble beneath him while seated upon the officer's grave, as though someone struggled below. At first the crowd dismissed him, but his fear, his stubborn insistence, spread unease. Spades were seized, and the shallow grave was torn open. What they uncovered froze every soul in horror. The officer sat nearly upright in his coffin, the lid splintered from his furious attempts to escape. Though he appeared lifeless, his posture betrayed the violence of his struggle. He was rushed to the hospital, where physicians discovered he still lived, barely in a suffocating state. Hours later, he revived, recognized familiar faces, and in broken whispers recounted the torment of his entombment. He had been conscious for more than an hour beneath the soil. The grave, filled loosely with porous earth, had allowed faint breaths of air. He heard footsteps above, voices of the living, and tried desperately to answer. It was the noise of the crowd, he said, that stirred him from his stupor. But awakening brought no relief, only the full, crushing realization of his fate. Alive, imprisoned in the grave. The officer's recovery seemed assured until reckless experimentation claimed his life. A galvanic battery was applied, and in a violent paroxysm of false vitality, he expired. Yet the mention of galvanism recalls a case even more astounding, one that shook London in 1831. Edward Stapleton, a young attorney, had apparently succumbed to typhus fever. His death baffled physicians who longed for a post-mortem examination. His family refused, but the doctors conspired to obtain the body in secret. With the aid of body snatchers, Stapleton was exhumed 3 nights after burial and carried to a private hospital. The corpse was fresh, unnervingly preserved. An incision was made, and curiosity led to the application of the galvanic battery. Convulsions followed, ordinary at first, though disturbingly lifelike in their violence. Hours passed, dawn approached, and the surgeons prepared to dissect. But one student, eager to test his theory, insisted on applying the current directly to a pectoral muscle. A rough cut was made, the wire pressed against living tissue, and then the impossible occurred. Stapleton rose from the table, not convulsing, not twitching, but standing. He stepped into the center of the room, eyes darting with unease, lips moving. Words spilled forth, broken, unintelligible, but undeniably human speech. The silence of the chamber shattered into horror, and then as suddenly as he had risen, Stapleton collapsed, lifeless once more upon the floor. For a few moments the room was frozen in awe. Then urgency broke the spell. Mr. Stapleton was alive, though faint and swooning. Ether was administered, and he revived, restored swiftly to health and to the company of his astonished friends. Yet his recovery was kept secret until danger of relapse had passed, their wonder too great to be easily described. The most chilling detail lay in Stapleton's own testimony. He insisted that he had never been fully unconscious. From the instant his physicians pronounced him dead until the moment he collapsed upon the hospital floor, he remained dimly aware, trapped in a twilight of sensation. His desperate words, "I am alive," uttered in the dissecting room, had gone unheard, lost in the confusion of his extremity. Such stories could be multiplied endlessly, but the truth needs no embellishment. Premature burial is real. And when we consider how rarely circumstances allow us to uncover such cases, we must admit that countless others may occur unnoticed. Indeed, whenever graveyards are disturbed, skeletons are often found in positions that whisper dreadful suspicions. Suspicion is terrible, but the doom itself is worse. No fate inflicts greater torment on body and mind than burial before death. Imagine the crushing weight on the lungs, the suffocating dampness of the earth, the clinging shroud, the rigid coffin pressing close. Darkness absolute, silence vast as an ocean, and the unseen presence of decay itself. Above, the air and grass, the friends who would rush to save us, if only they knew. But they cannot know. To them we are already gone. This is horror beyond imagination, a terror so profound that even the boldest mind recoils. It is the supreme nightmare of mortality, to be alive, yet sealed in the grave. There is no agony on earth, nor nightmare in hell, that rivals the horror of being buried alive. Every tale of such a fate grips us with a dreadful fascination, but its power lies in the conviction that these stories are true. And now, I must speak not of rumor or history, but of my own experience. For years, I was plagued by a strange affliction, what physicians, lacking a better term, call catalepsy. Its causes remain shrouded in mystery, but its effects are unmistakable. At times, the victim lies in a death-like trance, motionless, senseless, yet faintly alive. A weak pulse flickers, a trace of warmth lingers, A ghost of color clings to the cheek. A mirror held to the lips reveals only the faintest, uneven breath. Sometimes the spell lasts a day, sometimes weeks, even months, and in those long intervals, no test, no scrutiny can distinguish the sufferer from the truly dead. Only suspicion, born of prior attacks, and the absence of decay prevents premature burial. The disease advances gradually, each fit longer, each trance deeper. This slow progression is the only safeguard. For if the first attack were of the most extreme kind, the victim would almost certainly be consigned alive to the grave. My own case was no different. Without warning, I would sink into a half-swoon. No pain, no movement, no thought. Only a dull awareness, a shadowy consciousness of life, and of the figures gathered around my bed. And then, as suddenly as it began, the spell would break. Sensation would return in a rush, and I would awaken, trembling, from the abyss. At times the affliction struck me suddenly, like a merciless blow. A chill spread through my veins, dizziness clouded my sight, and I collapsed at once. Then came weeks of nothingness, black, silent, void. It was as if the universe itself had been erased, leaving only annihilation. And yet after such seizures, I returned slowly, painfully, as dawn creeps upon a beggar wandering through a frozen night. Wearily, faintly, but at last the light of the soul returned. Aside from these trances, my health seemed sound, yet sleep itself betrayed me. Upon waking, I could never seize my senses at once. Confusion reigned, memory vanished, and for long minutes I drifted in bewilderment, a prisoner of my own mind.
There was no physical pain in these ordeals, but the torment of the spirit was infinite. My imagination grew morbid, steeped in graves and epitaphs. I lived in reveries of death, consumed by the terror of premature burial. Day and night the specter haunted me. In daylight, meditation tortured me. In darkness, the horror was supreme. When night fell, I trembled as though I were the plumes upon a hearse. Sleep came only after a desperate struggle, for I feared that waking might mean finding myself sealed in a coffin. And when slumber finally claimed me, it was no refuge, only a plunge into phantoms, all overshadowed by one vast sepulchral vision. From these countless nightmares, one remains etched in memory. I dreamt I was locked in a trance deeper than any before. Suddenly, an icy hand pressed against my brow, and a gibbering voice hissed into my ear. "Arise!" I jolted upright. Darkness pressed in from every side, absolute and suffocating. I could not see the figure that had roused me, nor recall when the trance had begun, nor even where I lay. As I struggled to gather my thoughts, a cold hand clamped onto my wrist and shook it with impatient fury. A gibbering voice hissed, "Arise! Did I not command you to rise?" "Who are you?" I demanded. The voice answered with mournful tremor, "I have no name in the realm I inhabit. Once mortal, now fiend. Once merciless, now pitiful. Feel how I shudder. Hear my teeth chatter, not from the chill of endless night, but from horrors too great to endure. How can you sleep while such agonies cry out? Come, walk with me into the outer darkness and behold the graves. Is this not a spectacle of woe? Look. Suddenly, the graves of all mankind yawned open. From each seeped a faint phosphorescent glow, revealing the innermost recesses where shrouded bodies lay in solemn slumber beside the worm. But not all were at rest. Millions stirred, struggling faintly, their garments rustling in melancholy unrest. Even those who seemed still had shifted from the rigid positions in which they were first entombed. The voice whispered again as I gazed, "Is it not, oh, is it not a pitiful sight?" Before I could reply, the grip on my wrist vanished, the spectral lights extinguished. The graves slammed shut with violent finality, and from beneath the earth rose a chorus of despairing cries, echoing one last time, "Is it not, O God, is it not a most pitiful sight?"
The phantoms that haunted my nights bled into my waking hours, leaving my nerves shattered and my spirit enslaved to terror. I no longer dared to ride, to walk, or to stray far from home. I clung to the presence of those who knew of my affliction, fearing that a sudden trance might condemn me to the grave before my true condition could be understood. Even my closest friends became objects of suspicion. I dreaded that, in some unusually prolonged attack, they might mistake me for irrecoverable, or worse, that my affliction had become such a burden they would welcome the excuse to be rid of me. Their solemn promises meant nothing to me. I demanded oaths, sacred and binding, that I should never be buried until decay itself had advanced beyond doubt. Yet even these assurances could not soothe my mortal dread. Driven by obsession, I devised elaborate safeguards. I remodeled the family vault so it could be opened from within. A single touch upon the hidden lever would fling the iron door wide. I arranged for air and light to flow freely, and placed food and water within reach of the coffin prepared for me. That coffin was padded, its lid fitted with springs so sensitive that the faintest movement of my body would release it. And above all, from the roof of the tomb hung a great bell, its rope threaded through the coffin and tied to my hand, so that, should I awaken in the grave, my desperate tug would summon the living. But alas, what are precautions against the destiny of man? No contrivance, no vigilance, no human ingenuity can shield the doomed from the ultimate horror. Even with all my defenses, I remained foreordained to endure the agonies of living inhumation. There came a moment, one I had faced before, when I began to crawl back from the abyss of unconsciousness. At first, existence returned faintly, like the dim gray of dawn creeping across a lifeless sky. A dull unease, a numb endurance of pain without hope, without effort. Then, after long silence, a ringing in the ears. Later still, a tingling in the limbs. Then an endless calm, deceptively sweet, as thought struggled to awaken. A brief plunge back into nothingness. Then a sudden jolt, a quiver of the eyelid, and with it an electric terror that surged through me like a flood, driving blood in torrents to the heart. I tried to think. I tried to remember. Slowly memory returned, and with it the dreadful realization. This was no ordinary sleep. I recalled my affliction, catalepsy. And then, like the rush of a black ocean, the one idea consumed me, the horror of premature burial.
For minutes I lay motionless, paralyzed by despair. I dared not move, for movement might confirm the fate I dreaded. Yet something whispered within me that the truth was certain. At last,
Despair itself forced me to lift my heavy eyelids. Darkness, utter, eternal darkness. I knew the fit had passed. I knew my senses had returned, yet still no light. Only the rayless night that endures forever. I tried to scream. My lips twisted, my tongue convulsed, but no sound escaped. My lungs, crushed beneath an invisible weight, gasped and heaved like a mountain pressing down upon them. Each breath was a tortured struggle, each heartbeat a convulsion of despair. My jaws moved in a desperate attempt to scream, but I felt them bound, as though prepared for burial. Beneath me was a hard surface, my sides pressed tight against wooden walls. Until now I had not dared to move, but terror drove me to fling my arms upward. They struck solid wood, no more than 6 inches above my face. The truth was undeniable. I lay within a coffin. And yet, amid the storm of despair, a fragile hope flickered. I thought of my precautions, the safeguards I had built. I writhed, straining to force the lid open. It did not yield. My hands searched for the bell rope. Gone. Panic surged. The padding I had so carefully arranged was absent. Then, suddenly, the unmistakable odor of damp earth filled my nostrils. The realization struck with merciless clarity. I was not in my vault. I had fallen into a trance among strangers, and they had buried me like a beast, nailed into a common coffin, thrust deep into a nameless grave. The horror overwhelmed me. I struggled once more to cry out, and this time a shriek tore free. A wild, continuous scream echoed through the subterranean night. "Hello! Hello there!" barked a gruff voice. "What the devil's the matter now?" growled another. "Get out of that!" shouted a third. "Why are you yowling like a wildcat?" mocked a fourth. Rough hands seized me, shaking me violently. They did not wake me. I was already awake, but their coarse grip jolted me back into full memory. The adventure took place near Richmond, Virginia. With a friend, I had gone on a hunting trip along the banks of the James River. As night fell, a storm overtook us, and we sought refuge in the cabin of a small sloop anchored in the stream, its hold filled with garden soil. It was the only shelter available. I slept in one of the narrow berths, bare, without bedding, scarcely 18 inches wide, pressed tight between deck and floor. It was a coffin in all but name, and I wedged myself in with difficulty. Yet I slept soundly, and from those cramped circumstances, from my morbid bias of thought, and from the confusion that always clouded my senses upon waking, arose the vision I had mistaken for reality. The men who shook me awake were the crew and laborers unloading the vessel. The earthy smell came from the cargo itself. The bandage about my jaw was nothing more than a silk handkerchief I had tied around my head in place of a nightcap. The tortures I endured were equal, for the time, to those of actual burial, fearful, inconceivable. Yet out of that horror came salvation. Its very excess forced a change within me. My spirit hardened, my soul found strength. I went out into the world. I exercised, breathed the free air, turned my thoughts to life instead of death. I burned my medical books, abandoned morbid poetry, and cast aside tales of graveyards and sepulchres. From that night forward, I became a new man. My dread of premature burial vanished, and with it the cataleptic disorder that had haunted me. There are moments when even reason sees the world as a kind of hell, but imagination must not wander too far into its caverns, lest it be consumed. The legion of sepulchre terrors is not wholly fanciful, but like demons chained beneath the earth, they must be left to sleep. Disturb them, and they devour us.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.